like and subscribe. Beyond Antarctica. Chapter 13. It had been 4 days, and the relentless rain just ceased. The crew of the Celeb Mariner was far from calm. "Bob, is it still following us?" John asked. "Yes, sir. Roughly 200 yards directly behind us. That's 4 days now, sir," Bob replied. "At least there's some relief from the rain," John muttered, though the respite from weather did little to ease his mind. "Sir, it's starting to close the distance again," Bob mentioned. "I think it's coming in for another sniff," Bick interjected. "It came awfully close last night, roughly 50 yards or so." John straightened up. "Well, I'm not playing cat and mouse when I'm the mouse. The barrels should be refilled by now. Find a spot close to shore and park it, Bob. I want this boat re-swabbed with the goo." Bob grimaced. "Not that again. It reeks so bad I have trouble eating, and that says something, John." John replied, "I just feel like too much of it was washed off in the last few days, and I'm tired of being followed by megalodons. I don't sleep well, knowing one of those things are behind us." With that, the Celeb Mariner veered closer to shore, the decision made to cover the hull anew with the pungent protective slime. As the crew begrudgingly prepared to reapply the goo, they remained vigilant, eyes darting to the deeper waters, where the silhouette of the enormous predator lurked menacingly close to the surface. Kim walked onto the bridge with a tray of coffee. As Bick reached for a cup, Kim quickly turned the tray. "That one's for John," she said. Bick looked up, slightly disappointed. Kim added, "He has pain to deal with, and he refuses any medication from me, so I allow this for now." Emphasizing her point, she said, "For now." Handing her father his coffee, Kim asked, "Dad, do we really need to reapply that goo all over the ship? Can you skip the upper deck walls? I mean, why everywhere?" she questioned, hoping to avoid the pervasive, unpleasant odor. John pointed out to the distant sea where 2 massive fins circled waiting. "See that? That's why," he said simply, implying the presence of lurking dangers. Kim looked and understood the necessity, though she was clearly not pleased. She tried to check on his ribs, concerned about his well-being, but John swatted her hand away. "Stop that, Kim. I'm a grown-ass man. If I need it looked at, I'll call you," he stated firmly. Kim, frustrated, "Whatever, Dad. I'll be in my cabin if you need me," and left the bridge, her disdain for her father's stubbornness clear. Hours later, John noticed something unusual on the beach and grabbed Bob's attention. "Is that people on horseback?" he asked. Bob picked up the binoculars, inspecting the scene more closely, and confirmed, "Why, yes, it is. A dozen or more women on horses armed with shields and spears, sir." John, intrigued, asked for the binoculars. As Bob handed them over, John observed the women more closely. "Prepare the dinghy. I want to meet them before they decide to come to us," John decided, already strategizing the best approach to handle the unexpected visitors. He knew that managing first impressions could be critical under these circumstances. Bob announced over the comms, "Tony and Todd meet at the dinghy within 10 minutes. Away party, meet at the dinghy, gear in hand." As they approached, they noticed Kim waiting beside the vessel. She stepped aside to let John climb into the dinghy and then leaned in to quickly check Tony's shoulder wound, whispering something to him and giving him a hug before she stepped back. John eyed Tony curiously. "What was that about?" he asked. Tony glanced over his shoulder, ensuring Kim was out of earshot, and replied, "She just wants me to keep a close eye on you, sir. She's worried, that's all." John nodded, then said firmly, "Tony, keep that shotgun out of view and stay with the dinghy, just in case we need to make a quick exit." He handed Todd a pistol, adding, "Tuck that in your pants and watch my back. Same as last time. I'll handle the communicating." As Tony and Todd nodded their agreement, John steered the dinghy toward the shore. Tony positioned himself near the engine, ready to initiate a swift departure if necessary, while Todd discreetly adjusted the pistol at his side, ensuring it was accessible yet concealed. Upon landing, the men stepped onto the sandy beach, their eyes scanning the surrounding area. The women on horseback, now just a short distance away, observed their arrival with a composed curiosity. One approached with a confident stride, her posture commanding. John took the lead, extending a hand in greeting. "I'm John. captain of the Celeb Mariner. As she approached, the woman ignored John's extended hand, walking 2 feet past him to gaze out at the ship. Then she turned back. Speaking in an unintelligible language, she raised her shield and pointed her spear at him. Gesturing to the ground, John immediately dropped to his knees, and he gestured for Todd to do the same. John began to draw in the sand, sketching out their recent encounters with the megalodon. The woman asked, through gestures, how they managed to travel the great seas without being devoured by the creatures. As he explained, the other women surrounded them with spears at the ready. Todd whispered nervously, "I'm really not liking this, John." "Stay calm," John whispered back. The woman spoke in a harsh tone, and the other women instantly grabbed John and Todd. John yelled out, "Go back to the ship, Tony, quick! Do nothing!" 2 women charged towards the dinghy, stopping at the water's edge as Tony throttled up and headed off into the distance. The women dragged John and Todd, bound their hands, and tossed them over the backs of horses. They then rode off into the woods. Upon arrival at the village, they were stripped of all clothes and belongings. They were then unceremoniously thrown into separate cages situated in the bustling town square, leaving them nude and with nothing but their thoughts on display for all to observe. The village itself was a vibrant hub of activity, with women of all ages going about their daily tasks. Little girls played nearby under the watchful eyes of their elders, while others tended to crops or crafted various goods at stalls lined up along the dirt paths. The architecture was a mix of wooden structures and tents, suggesting a semi-nomadic lifestyle. Colorful banners and symbols adorned the streets, many depicting valiant female warriors and scenes of hunting and gathering, underscoring a society deeply rooted in matriarchal traditions. As guards armed with spears patrolled the area, keeping a watchful eye. As the sun began to set, the village's activities didn't wane. Instead, the square filled with more women as preparations for what appeared to be a ceremony began. Despite their precarious position, both John and Todd took the opportunity to observe and learn as much as they could about their captor's culture and social structure, hoping to find a way to communicate and perhaps negotiate their release. "We need to do something right now. Get all available hands ready," Kim shouts. Bob grabs her by the arms, pulling her close. "Kim, I can tell you're mad, but going off half-cocked won't solve anything." Kim nods in agreement, her breathing steadying as she finds focus in Bob's confidence. "What do you suggest we do?" Bob lays out his plan. "I'm sending Tony in to take a look. He's to sneak in, see what he can find, and report back." Hours later, Tony arrives back at the Celeb Mariner. After debriefing with Tony about the village's layout and the captive's conditions, Bob suggests waiting until daylight. "We will try one more time with negotiations," he states, "while we plan a rescue mission in case the negotiations don't pan out." As night envelops the ship, the crew works under the cloak of darkness, prepping for what could be a perilous dawn. Maps are drawn, roles are assigned, and every possible outcome is considered. Morning breaks as Kim, accompanied by a couple of crew members and Tony, prepare to make their move. Each of them is armed with makeshift spears crafted overnight from the rails of the ship, their points sharpened to lethal precision. Kim, with the shotgun slung over her shoulder, listens as Tony briefs her on the ammunition. "Every other round is a slug, the rest are buckshot. You'll know what you fired last by the kick. The slugs kick much harder, so be careful." Kim, with a slight nod, reminds him, "I served in the military. I know how to handle a weapon, Tony. I just need you to watch my back." As they load up the dinghy, Kim turns to Bob, who's overseeing the preparation. "Bob, if we run into trouble and you don't see or hear anything from us for a week, try to get home and tell our story." Bob chuckles. "I'll do no such thing, Kim. I'll come get you. No one is left behind on my watch." Reassured by his commitment, Kim nods firmly. They lowered the dinghy into the gentle surf and headed to shore. As the dinghy made landfall, they were immediately greeted by a dozen mounted women on horseback. Tony surged forward, spear raised in a defensive stance. The leading woman dismounted with a fluid grace, discarding her shield and spear without a second glance. She walked straight past Tony, pushing his makeshift weapon aside with a dismissive hand. Her gaze then fixed intensely on Kim. She leaned close, scrutinizing Kim's face from one side to the other as if committing every detail to memory. She lifted a small section of Kim's blonde hair and just stared at it for a moment. While stroking it softly, her gaze slowly raised to Kim's. After a moment's gaze into Kim's eyes, she stepped back, gave a brief nod to Tony, and pointed sharply to the ground, issuing a command in a harsh, commanding tone. Kim, understanding the gravity of the moment, instructed, "Lower your weapons." Stepping forward between Tony and the tribal woman, she sought to diffuse the tension. Despite the language barrier, Kim's authoritative presence seemed to resonate with the leader, who suddenly shouted orders that halted her warriors' advance. Realizing they were outnumbered, Kim tactically retreated towards the dinghy, pulling out the shotgun and firing a warning shot into the air. The resounding blast startled the horses, causing disarray among the women as their mounts scattered. Kim commanded her own crew, "Everyone on your knees and drop your weapons now. Lower your heads and don't look at them." The crew complied immediately, and the tribal women regrouped, forming a shield wall with one warrior stepping forward, her intense gaze fixed on Kim. Matching the warrior's intensity, Kim knelt down, initiating a dialogue through the universal language of drawing in the sand. Countless hours go by and the sun began to set, marking the end of a long day of silent negotiation and mutual testing of resolve. With the situation tentatively stable, Kim signaled to her crew, "Rise, but keep your heads down. Leave the weapons and get back to the dinghy." As night enveloped the beach, they headed back to the Celeb Mariner. Once aboard, they convened on the bridge where Kim recounted the details of her interactions with what she called the tribal leader. Kim outlined the surprising cultural dynamics she had learned from the tribal leader. "Men are essentially possessions in their society," she explained. "A woman's wealth and status are measured by the number of male slaves she owns and their condition. She even complimented me, saying it was obvious I keep my men well disciplined," Kim added with a wry smile, glancing at Tony. "She took Dad and Todd because they wouldn't reveal how we travel the seas without being attacked by the sea creatures. According to their laws, men aren't allowed to own anything or keep secrets. They're set for execution by week's end for their treachery." Kim continued, "Fortunately, I convinced her that you all are my slaves and they were merely following orders. She proposed a trade, Todd for a dozen of their men, and when I declined, she threw in the old man they captured as a sweetener. I told her that in our land, a woman keeps her male slaves for life if they serve well. The tribal leader understood. She said, 'We do the same with our war horses in our society.'" Bob interjected somewhat impatiently, "Kim, this is all fascinating, but did you actually accomplish anything tangible with the so-called Amazonian tribal leader woman?" Tony, joking, interjected, "Hold up, no one asked if I wanted to be traded. Being a slave to a tribe of dominant ladies does have its appeal," he quipped, earning an eye roll from Kim. Ignoring Tony's comment, Kim clarified, "We've arranged a meeting on the beach tomorrow morning. They'll bring some slaves, including Dad and Todd. If we don't want to trade, then we compete in games on the beach. The winner of 3 events takes all." Bob raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly are we putting up as collateral, Kim?" "All my male slaves, of course," Kim replied with a smirk, causing a wave of grimaces across the faces of the crew. "It's fine, guys," she reassured them. "If things start to go south after the second event, we'll launch a surprise attack, free them, and make a dash for the ship." Bob said, "Now you're talking. What are these 3 events?" Kim outlined the proposed competitions as briefed by the tribal leader: an archery contest, a spear-throwing challenge, and a final test of strength and endurance in a wrestling match. "Preparation is key," Kim concluded, "and timing of our backup plan is crucial." As the morning dawned, Bob and Tony approached the dinghy, makeshift weapons in hand, along with some crew members Bob had selected for the task. They watched as the dinghy was lowered. Tony, peering over the rail, looked back at Bob. "It's Kim and a couple of the guys," he noted. Bob walked over, joining Tony at the rail, and muttered, "Damn that girl. What's she up to this time?" Meanwhile, Kim slid up onto the beach where the tribal leader met her. 1,000 warriors lined the beach, hooting and hollering, some presenting slaves on their knees with heads in the sand in anticipation of a trade. Kim, turning to her accompanying crewman. "I kind of lied to the others," she confessed. "I told them the first competition was archery. It's actually a duel between their best warrior and ours, and since I'm the only woman on the ship, that makes me the only warrior. The others would never have agreed to this," she said, cocking the shotgun. "Like my father, I will send no one where I will not dare to tread myself," she declared, stepping forward to meet her challenger. After the tribal leader proposed numerous trade options, all of which Kim refused, the tribal leader allowed Kim to call upon her champions for the competition. The first event was a duel between two warriors, a fight to the death. The second event was a javelin throw, a test of bravery and precision. The third was a wrestling match challenging the competitor's strength. Traditionally, all challengers would be women, but exceptions were made for Kim, allowing her to use her male slaves as substitutes since she was the only warrior from her crew. This accommodation was made to avoid disadvantaging Kim by overburdening her with all three events, which would not be seen as honorable by the tribal standards. "Tony, was that gunfire?" Bob asked. As two more gunshots rang out, Tony looks towards the beach in horror. "No," he screamed. Bob shouts, "The dinghy is on its way back." As Bob tosses the inflatable aside, in disgust, as the dinghy arrives, they quickly board. Tony asks, "Where's Kim?" "On the beach," one said, as Bob takes control of the dinghy and throttles at full speed. One of the crew members responds, "She told us to head back and get you." Tony shoves the guy into his seat and snaps, "And you left her there by herself? Both of you came back, you cowards." The men lower their heads in shame. "Tony, you know how she gets," one mumbles. They skid up on the beach where a giant circle of tribal women are hooting and hollering, creating a frenzied atmosphere. As Tony bursts through the crowd, he sees Kim being hoisted in the air by the tribal women, her shotgun held high overhead. As they set her down, she limps over to Tony and declares confidently, "One competition down, one more to win, and we're out of here." While the tribal women are preparing for the next event, the javelin, Kim filled them in on what they had just missed. "I realized you would never let me participate in the duel, so I lied, but it went as well as I could expect. Their warrior charged at me, and I raised the shotgun and fired. The buckshot rang off her shield, stopping her momentarily in a jerking fashion. She regrouped and threw her spear, slicing my leg. I shot again, but it was too late. She was on top of me, shield charging and chucking me into the air. I landed on my back, raised the weapon, fired, but too late. She shoved the barrel to the side as she jumped on top of me, smashing my face with the shield. I thought I was a goner as she raised the shield for a final blow. I twisted my wrist, raised the weapon just enough, and with the last bit of my energy, I pulled the trigger, watching her lift into the air off me and flail in the sand in agony as she died. That's when the women charged in and lifted me into the air. Bob says, "You're lucky I don't put you over my knee right here in front of everyone, young lady. I remind you, I'm just the one to do it too." "Yeah, I know it was a shitty thing to do, Bob. I'm sorry, but sometimes one must do what they believe in, no matter who it may hurt," Kim responds, looking over at Tony. "You're up next. Win this, and we take the big prize home." Bob looks over at Kim. "There are at least 1,000 warriors on this beach. There's no way we can safely rescue your father today. We have to win this competition." Kim says, "No way Tony can lose this, Bob. We're good. Tony, all you have to do is stand there inside the circle as they throw their javelin at you and not flinch. If they hit you, they lose. If you hit them, you lose. The idea is to scare them into taking a step outside the circle. You go until someone is hit or moves. You're the bravest man I know. You got this." Tony looks at Kim. "Did you forget something?" Kim says, "What?" "My shoulder, Kim. That's my throwing arm." Kim reassures him, "I think it's more about the bravery of standing in place." Tony steps into the circle to take his turn. As the tribal woman throws her javelin, it lands inches from his feet, but Tony stands firm, not flinching. However, when it's his turn to throw, his attempt goes awry. He stumbles and falls, his hand overreaching and falling just outside the circle. The challenge is called in favor of the tribal woman. Tony looks up apologetically. Kim reassures him, saying, "It's fine. We all have days like that. A large circle is drawn into the sand by the tribal women who then dance around it in a form of ritual. The tribal leader steps inside and beckons Kim to join her. With a smile, Kim explains, "This competition is easy to explain. Don't leave the circle. The first one removed from the circle loses." Tony asks, "Like sumo wrestling in Japan?" Kim nods. "Yes, just like that," as she steps forward to take on the tribal leader. However, Bob reaches out and grabs her shoulder, pausing her. "Hey, Kim," he says. She stops and looks back. "Why don't you let me take this one?" he suggests, stepping in front of her and into the circle. "We kind of need to win this one, or we are all slaves." The shouts and chants of the others quiets in anticipation of the event. The tribal leader shouts to the sky and charges, but Bob stands firm. The impact of her slamming into Bob bounces her off him, and she lands firmly in the sand. Bob turns to Kim, and as he picks up the woman with one arm and raises her in the air, says, "I really don't like you right now, Kim. Making me lay hands on a woman is a pet peeve of mine." He walks 3 feet to his left, drops the woman outside the line, and walks back to Kim. Sitting next to her, he finishes, "If you make a habit of this, I don't think we can be friends." Kim mentioned, "You said you have this. I did not make you." Bob replied with a chuckle, "If we wanted to win, half pint. Yes, I had to." Smiling, Kim winked at him and gestured toward her father. The tribal leader spoke briefly, signaling to her members, who quickly handed John and Todd their belongings. They hurried to the dinghy, putting on their clothes and hopping across the hot sand. John urged, "Come on, people, let's get out of here, double time." Bob noted, "John, it'll take 2 trips." John replied, "I'll wait with you. Move out, everyone." As they arrived back on the Celeb Mariner, John thanked everyone for their efforts, acknowledging the teamwork and bravery that had seen them through the ordeal. John said proudly, "Thanks to each of you for standing together through this. We're more than a crew, we're a family, and today proved that beyond doubt." This is not goodbye, nor the end. Until the story continues, my friends. B.N.Rocker.